yes, we absolutely need more data. Like there's a lot of companies that have tried to move in this direction in a variety of ways, and it can be good if you apply it with context.
Welcome to the Circuit Magazine, the #1 source of information on protection matters, the industry-leading magazine for all security professionals who want to stay ahead of the game.
Critical thinking for the protector of tomorrow. Today, Shaun West and myself, we're going to be talking with Treston Wheat, who is a red teamer, an intelligence analyst, adjunct professor, worked with EP previously, and is currently advising a number of EP clients, of course. And he very kindly spoke at the Bodyguards for Kids initiative, which we as the Circuit Magazine supported. Critical thinking sounds a little abstract, but I feel that the community can really harness this as a skill set. What do you think, Shaun?
No, I totally agree. I'm doing a lot of training at the moment, coaching training, and I have a lot of interest in. I'm learning about NLP, neuro linguistic programming, and there's a lot of that when you're talking critical thinking and asking powerful questions, not just accepting what the person's saying. If you ask powerful questions, you find you can dig in, you can get more information that can be useful both to them and to your client and to the teams on the ground. So I'm definitely interested to see where he takes it, how he uses critical thinking and the little golden nuggets that he pulls out to pass on to the teams and that he can give to our listeners.
And that, as you say, is the nugget, because he has previously done this for EP teams, and now he's doing penetration testing, and he works for other EP organizations. But that's the golden nugget, because many solutions out there seem to say, "Did you know you're going to Egypt? But by the way, there are some pyramids." It's like, okay, thank you very much. There's not particularly intelligence, and it's not particularly critical thinking. So this bridges the gap between a lot of the academia out there, a lot of the political analysis to say, what's in it for me? That I guess fundamentally that's what we're looking for. How applicable is this for the everyday operator though? Because do they have time to sort of sit down and think, oh, my principal is based out of Middle East, and there are protests about this particular subsector of the industry, and so I feel X, Y, and Z will extrapolate. Is that for the everyday protector, or is it maybe for someone like Treston who does this as his day job?
I think an everyday protector can always, help themselves by being a little bit more of a critical thinker, by not just asking the surface level questions, by digging in a little bit, you'll get a little bit more information, which builds a bigger picture. But when you've got a large, well-known principal who might be the head of some global corporate entity, generally it should be you have specialists in that area who will go bring the information, disseminate it, and give it to the relevant teams. For instance, if your president of the corporation you're looking after has just started mining in Africa and it's caused a bit of an uproar there, you have them people that's looking at it, and they can disseminate it to, like you say, they might want to do a PR campaign, which has nothing to do with the EP teams. However, to be in the picture and be aware there is some issues over here, so that may trigger something back around where your principal is. You can just upgrade the vigilance around your principal's property when you're going out, because that knock-on effect in that other country maybe someone, a national from that country living in the area of your principal, that it's had some knock-on effect to them. So it's always good, no matter how little it is, to receive them nuggets of information, which you can, if you're aware, you can increase your situational awareness of everything that's going on around.
And that ties to reputational management too, which I think more people are prepared to deal with and to feel is for them. But I wonder, do you think this has become extra popular over the last few years? Because there were times, we're not naming times or places, but there were times where information wasn't available, and on the ground, truth, quote unquote, was not always available. Do you think this ties into an appetite for private intelligence, doing your own due diligence, things like that?
Yeah, I think, there's many different areas of the world opened up now with the technology we have, the internet, the open source intelligence that's available to everybody. Some of the I mean, great things that's coming like ChatGPT and all of these, different technologies we can harness. I think there definitely is a bigger appetite, and there's more strings that people can add to their bow because training is more widely available in these areas. So yeah, I definitely think there's more of an appetite purely through the tools people have, right at their fingertips every day now. You don't have to fly to another country to go and do a training in a specific topic. Generally, you can have it delivered, via Zoom, by having access to a program. Yeah, I definitely think things are more widely available now and of interest to more people because it's more achievable.
Yeah, maybe that's what we're going to run with Treston. It's now more achievable and more applicable, which would be great for our audience. So let's get into it with Treston Wheat. We're going to look at critical thinking for tomorrow's protector.
And now, let's meet one of the contributors to the Circuit magazine.
Critical thinking for the protector. Today, I'm very pleased to sit down with Dr. Treston Wheat, Red Team analyst. It's a great pleasure to have you on. Obviously, those of us who have been to the Bodyguards for Kids symposium, you very kindly spoke there. We'll get to know a little bit more about you in just a moment. Why is critical thinking so important for the protector?
Critical thinking is quintessential for the protector because they have to make so many fast, impactful decisions. And so they need to be prepared to work through the heuristics problems and the cognitive biasy problems at a very quick rate. And then they have to make long-term decisions for their principals or who they're protecting. And they can't waste resources. They need to be able to direct appropriate efforts. And so critical thinking is central for them to be effective and successful at their jobs.
Okay, makes sense. And then hopefully that resonates with a lot of the audience. They think, well, I'm already doing that, hopefully. But what about you? Where does your passion for this come from?
Absolutely. So I usually describe myself as a displaced academic. I got my PhD and then realized academia wasn't for me. And I sort of fell into the corporate security protector space. And I realized getting my doctorate that critical thinking actually wasn't a big part of academia. They had overly quantified, because my doctorate is in political science, they'd over quantified everything, and they had no sense of history, no sense of philosophy, no sense of a higher order thinking. And I come from a very specific tradition in political science of like the Hannah Arendt, Leo Strauss kind of tradition, where I rejected all of that. And so I brought that paradigm with me to corporate security. And I did very, very well as an intel analyst for geopolitical risk in particular, applying this broader framework of analysis that was far more impactful. And it's why I got a lot of people to sort of accept intel, where security professionals, especially protectors, can have a tenser relationship with intel for a couple of reasons, which we can go into. But by forcing myself and other analysts around me to actually have to work through causal mechanisms and problems, I really saw the importance of bringing critical thinking as a philosophical concept to the industry.
I like it, and I think protectors are thinking people, so this should really resonate with them. But what about the uninitiated protector, or the protector that thinks they're uninitiated? They're like, critical thinking. I've never really thought about applying that to my day-to-day job. What should they better understand?
Absolutely. So most people use critical thinking in their everyday lives. They just don't call it that. The difference for, say, uninitiated protector or coming into it is learning to articulate your thought process. Because usually people have so much training. So a lot of protectors come from military or law enforcement, and you have a lot of training. And everything happens quick because you have prepared for certain issues. But you need to be able to explain those issues to other security professionals that aren't, say, the direct protector that are backing you up, or to your principal or business partners. You need to be able to work through those causal mechanisms of why something is important or why you have to use resources. And so being able to articulate why you are making a decision is just as important as the decision making itself. And so it becomes a really important business skill to be able to work through all of these complicated and difficult ideas, because you have to justify a lot of what you do repeatedly.
And I guess that's why private intelligence and private SOCs and things like that are so popular, because something flashes up on the news, and then does it affect me? And if it does, to what extent is it as it is presented? Because maybe one news article might try to create fear, one might try to create calm. Is it as simple as that? Because if I'm a protector and I'm thinking I want to develop these critical thinking skills, is it as simple as sorting the wheat from the chaff in the news?
No, it goes so much more deeper than that. And this is the thing about, and this is not just a security professionals thing. This is sort of writ large about people, is they think, oh, I read the news, therefore I understand politics, or I read the news, therefore I understand geopolitics, or anything along those lines. But one doesn't actually understand the applicability of it, or the multi layers of each of the issues. And this is where the critical thinking comes in. And so you're referencing news like promoting fear or hope or stability. And so we might put that within, say, a political paradigm or political framework by which the news is being filtered. There's nothing inherently wrong with having a paradigm like that. So British media, I'll say, is generally more overt about their political biases than the US media. But it doesn't mean anything, say, like a conservative or labor paper is publishing is wrong or false, but it is filtered through that lens. So for the security professional, though, they have to take it a step further in that they have to make it applicable to what they're doing. And so newspapers will be describing an event, but you have to draw out the relevant pieces for your principal or your organization of what actually could be applicable. You have to go that step further. And then something I talk about regularly with critical thinking is I'm entirely cool or comfortable with political bias, because people have their frameworks, they have their ideas. The bigger threat are those cognitive biases like anchoring bias or availability bias that actually causes significantly more analytic problems than a political paradigm. So, a conservative paper might be writing about a certain kind of terrorism, and they want you to think that terrorism is a big deal. It obviously is on a social level, but then for the security professional, they can't let that be the end of it. So in the US, I reference this as like a regular security thing. Terrorism actually isn't that common in the US. We have had multiple terrorist attacks, and there have been some really big ones. But of the 4,500 or so people who have died of terrorism in the last century or so in the US, 3,000 of those were on 9/11. And then another 200 something were the Oklahoma City bombing. So that gets rid of a huge chunk of possible deaths from terrorism. And so you have to set aside that availability or anchoring bias of terrorism equals massive death when you're thinking through security issues.
Yeah, no, that is key. And I think many people are, from the law enforcement community or the intelligence community, and maybe they have been focused on things that create terror for so long that they might say organized crime. I'm not familiar with organized crime, and people on the ATF side of the house are probably screaming at them, saying, "No, please look at all this," And I like that, because maybe you read a left-leaning paper and it says whatever, and a right-leaning paper says whatever, and it's not that the information is wrong because they're quite overt about what they're trying to do, but you might miss what's actually happening.
Absolutely. And trying to draw out the disparate pieces together. So this is where journalism can be limited. And it's not a critique of journalism. The journalists are doing their jobs. But as security professionals, especially intel analysts, you're supposed to be drawing different things together, different variables together to explain cause and consequence, because the ultimate goal is what we refer to as actionable. We need the security professional, the protector, to be able to act on the information that they are consuming or being provided by an intel analyst. And so just drawing on a couple, articles doesn't even get you there. You have to be able to extract usually more than whatever the journalists are talking about and be able to put it into context. And the context is what really matters of whether we're talking about protests, weather events, because those are always huge, traffic, et cetera, that a protector has to really care about. You need to be able to put it in the proper context and probabilities.
So, okay, and let's take a step back, because you mentioned political theory and you mentioned your doctorate in politics, and I appreciate that, right? I have a master's in political economy and European law and things like that. So I appreciate that, right? But and I see you have had a successful career in corporate security, and therefore this is fantastic that we're talking to you. But there have been some people who have tried to make the jump from academia or political risk, and the work they present is not so applicable. So when we read their threat and analysis reports, it says Mali is an emerging economy and it is got some challenges. And like, well, okay, good, but that's not quite enough. And I guess, how have you made the leap, and how have you made it applicable?
Absolutely. So this is a fantastic question, because I have a lot of criticisms of academia and the way like political risk analysts are trained to think about things. Because I'm going to start with like the way people are trained in school is you're writing papers on a broad idea. And so people get into political risk and they're like, oh, I really love this political topic. I want to talk about this political issue. And I think it's important for the country or my particular feelings about human rights or whatever the issue. That's not the way you have to approach it. You have to have the right paradigm, the right framework of mind to analyze the events. So that's sort of step one, is like the training is usually way too broad for this. Number two, I'm very, very lucky. I got my master's from Georgetown Security Studies program. And in that program, they were hyper focused on applicability. It was overwhelmingly security professionals teaching us with a couple academics. And so our papers would regularly be a memo rather than like a full paper. And so I remember the hardest one I wrote was for a national security class. I had to summarize the Syrian conflict that was going on at the time and come up with 3 possible policy proposals in 1,000 words. Like that teaches you to move down to like the applicable stuff. So I was very lucky with that training before I moved on to my doctorate, in which I was able to incorporate a lot more information. And I didn't do my doctorate the way most people in getting their PhDs do theirs. It was, again, why I say I was displaced academic. My dissertation drew on international law and political theory and security studies and regional studies and pulled a whole bunch of stuff together. And so because I was sort of a black sheep of academia, I had learned the requisite skills by accident to come into corporate security and be able to work through these issues. Now, going to the political risk people as well. So they have generally less useful training in schooling and academia because they don't work through direct security issues. They focus on very broad topics rather than driving down into actionability. But then I think a critical thing is they forget the next layer. So as I mentioned with like the news things, it's usually multiple frameworks and layers of analysis that you need to get through to get to the ultimate point that's really important. And political risk analysts usually don't know business very well. They might have studied economics, but economics is not the same thing as a business perspective. And then they tend not to think in very tactical security terms. And so what they're usually lacking is drawing from these big ideas and coming down to a business perspective and a physical security perspective, which have their own ways of engaging information in the world and what they need to be able to do their jobs well. And so they miss a couple critical steps analytically to draw the really important stuff out.
Yeah, and that's maybe that jump, that leap, because I mean it's perfectly fair and reasonable. You might be further along in your security career, and then you go and do a master's at Cranford or Portsmouth or other universities. You know, maybe around the world, distance learning
Hmm.
and yeah, navel gazing might be the name of the game, right? But that's sort of barbarians to the boardroom. That's reflecting and going, do you know what? My life has actually followed this academic arc as well, or maybe I can have a contribution. The urban myth that people raise is I got an intelligence briefing when I went to Egypt, and it said, "Did you know that there are some pyramids?" You know, whether or not that actually happened, I just feel that the applicability is a challenge. Now, in a
Hmm.
step change, um, protectors see a lot of things.
Hmm.
Police, our armed forces see a lot of things, not always good. And so they might start projecting one example of things not being good to all areas of society. Now, the last few years, um, people saw good, the bad, the ugly, and the true, the untrue, the grey. What has your work been like in that context? Because surely every operator is a sensor point. Every operator is trying to get some data on the ground, but at the same time, they do have a bias because they have seen, you know, a mixture of things that have turned out to not be quite as they imagined.
Absolutely. So this is, I think, a big issue with military and law enforcement people moving over to corporate security. Because the way I usually like to phrase it is, when I got my first job in corporate security, I thought it was going to be like Jason Bourne, but it was really more like Office Space.
Mm.
Um, and so it's a very, very different world for corporate security where 99% of the time, nothing is really happening. Um, and so where security professionals and protectors, especially when they come from law enforcement and military, they've usually seen, as you sort of put it, like the worst of humanity. They've seen the bad stuff day in and day out because they have an active role to play in those issues. And so it makes them pessimists overwhelmingly. Nothing wrong with pessimism. It can help you prepare for a lot of bad things. But when we're thinking critically and analytically, we have to think probabilistically, which means, is there an X chance of this happening? And not only is there an X chance, what factors and environments have to exist for that probability to increase or decrease? And so I mentioned the terrorism issue, but we talk about crime on the streets. So something that when I worked as a intel analyst, a lot of people I did travel security analysis for were like, okay, we know crime exists in whatever area we're going to. We don't need you to tell us like crime rates for travel risk security. We need to know a big thing was traffic. Because when you're a protector, the biggest thing that will impact your client when you're in the private sector is missing their meetings or traffic impacting it. So I would spend a lot more time on traffic patterns in an area, and then looking at protests and where there have been normal protests in an area that could disrupt traffic. And so like it became less about, say, like violence than business continuity, making sure that your principal is getting to where they need to go on time and they're not disrupted by local events. This goes back to what we were saying about political risk, and then putting on that business lens of what does your principal actually need. And so if you're just tracking protests and you say there are protests here, that's not enough. You need to get into the nitty gritty and say, because it's less about a particular political movement or anything than how is it going to impact your principal? How is it going to impact your client? And so for security professionals and protectors who have gone through a lot of rougher stuff, especially if they've served overseas, that pessimistic view tends to cloud their probabilistic analysis. And so they just assume that bad things are going to happen, that this is going to be the worst case scenario. And you should prepare for worst case scenario. But when we're thinking about the most applicable stuff, you need to put a significant amount of context and probabilistic analysis. And so this is where you would say, you know, we're calculating for X, and so we need to find out the probabilities of A, B, and C, and the context of which this would show intent for something raising or lowering. And oftentimes these numbers shrink quite a bit when you use proper context and analysis. And so you're giving your principal and customer a very different view than if you come directly from, say, like a war zone and you're like, no, of course everything's falling apart. Well, that's not where most of these people are existing or operating.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, it would be a bizarre day that you take a principal into a hot zone. But having said that, on this subject of pessimism, maybe this is sort of a populist type topic, because it gets a lot of protectors excited, or at least interested. Could you tell me a bit about your work dispelling myths and so on? Now, there's certainly bad things going on, and protectors have certainly seen bad things, and they certainly know the minds of the rich and the powerful. But has it been a challenge, or should it be a challenge, to use critical thinking to sort of say, well, this big theory is out there. Let me provide some realism. I mean, how much can you speak to that?
Absolutely. So I've done this as an intel analyst multiple times, where protectors will have seen something, usually on Reddit, but other sort of short form social media things, and they can get spun up because, again, they've seen a lot of bad stuff, and so they translate that to a worst case scenario rather than applying the probabilistic reasoning I'm talking about. And so I've had to do it multiple times of sort of dispelling conspiracy thought, and conspiracy concepts and theories and ideas, where you're right. A lot of protectors have seen the worst. They know how, we'll say, like, elites operate in a specific way. But there's a very specific cognitive bias with trying to apply that to bigger issues. I've seen it multiple times where protectors will say, this bad thing happened, therefore it must have been by design, because I've seen the power these people have, or I've seen this particular issue. But that's bad critical thinking, because stupidity can have the same consequence as malicious intent. And people often then conflate the two, is because, like, no, you have all these resources, you have all this money, it must have been by design. Well, no, most people are just kind of ignorant of the way the world works, and they don't really care about the consequences of their actions or how they go about things. A common comparison would be throughout a lot of, say, the Middle East. There were tons of conspiracy theories about American use of guided munitions. And because there was the idea that America was so technologically advanced that they couldn't possibly miss their target by accident. So if they hit civilians, or they missed their target and hit something else, it must have been by design. Because they're so technologically advanced, they're so superior. There's no way that they could have made this accident, or not intended to hurt these people. And so where this comes back to is protectors, again, they have all this experience, and so they try to translate it directly into worst case scenarios in a lot of ways. But overwhelmingly, the vast majority of the time, that's just not true. It's mostly just a confluence of bad decisions and events that have led to something happening.
Which reminds me of the movie Burn After Reading, which if you haven't seen it, is all sorts of weird things happen, but no one's quite sure why.
Yes, no, that's a fantastic example. Especially, I love, there's so many wonderful scenes in that movie. So if you haven't seen it, please go watch it. But like at the end, where the main, like, director character is like, did we learn anything? And they're like, no. And they're like, okay. And then they just disperse.
Yeah, it's tough, isn't it? But that whole need to find the truth according to your needs is why the private intelligence industry is so important. And we shouldn't be surprised, should we? Because we've seen it in financial risk. So an actuary is very well paid.
Mm-hmm.
do you think that we're going to see an increased need for, like, I don't know, a corporate security actuarial scientist, but not an actuary? I don't know. Like, maybe that's you. Maybe we're going to need to replicate you soon.
Well, so I want to issue sort of a word of caution on the quantification of analysis. Uh, as I kind of mentioned earlier, my philosophical leanings tend to go against that because humanity can't quite be quantified the way we would normally want. And especially when you're trying to make risk decisions. And so the way I would phrase this is, how do you quantify a Hitler? How do you quantify a Churchill? You change those dynamics, say like in World War II, fundamental differences of outcome. And so when you're trying to base things on just like data analysis, not just probabilistic analysis, because that can be very good, but when you're just trying to base everything on large pools of data, you're going to miss things as well. The future of this is learning to combine those quantitative analyses with the broader philosophical, historical, cultural context and being able to merge them together. And that is going to be the real challenge and key, because people who are trained in one area are not trained in the other. And they often have a very difficult time crossing those boundaries as well. This is so a common theme of kind of what I'm talking about is a generalist approach to security. You need to be able to draw on multiple areas to prevent cognitive biases from from mitigating good analysis. And so is what you're saying of, yes, we absolutely need more data. Like there's a lot of companies that have tried to move in this direction in a variety of ways. And it can be good if you apply it with context. And so we can talk about, say, political risk, which is one of my areas of expertise. And so, okay, we're going to collect all this data on a particular political issue, and we think that there's so much likelihood of X or Y happening. All right, that's a great place to start. But then we need to apply the personalities of people involved. We need to apply the culture of wherever this issue is happening, so that we can give context to these issues. So one of the reasons, for example, Henry Kissinger, why was he such an effective national security advisor and secretary of state? Because he would put himself in the mindset of his adversaries. He did it from a realpolitik perspective, where it was, I believe that other countries, other people have interests. I need to understand their interests if I'm going to secure the interests of my country. And so this is where it takes a bit of psychology and working through the mindset. In red teaming, we call it the adversarial mindset, to take on the personality and the ideas of your opponent. And you have to be able to pull that together with the quantitative stuff and the qualitative methods as well. You really need a fusion of the two if you want good analysis.
So does that mean every EP team has got to have one of you on tap, or fractional you, or you in a box? I don't know. Like, what does that mean for the EP team?
No, and this is tough. It's difficult because there is no definitive training for, say, an analyst. You can get hired coming from a multiplicity of backgrounds, and so the security profession, the corporate security profession, is relatively inchoate. It hasn't been around for long enough to be truly professionalized in the Huntingtonian understanding of professionalized. And so I would very much support the idea of having someone like me on every EP team, as sort of a check and helping everyone work through ideas and concepts. But if we want this at scale, a big thing we need to think through is the training and professionalization of analysts joining in the protector space. And this is going to take a lot of work from very different parts of the sector, but we need to work on that standardization. And so this can include some basic quantitative methods analysis, Bayesian statistics, can include a bit of philosophical training, historical training, etc., in order to create a curriculum, and then a lot of training in critical thinking. And people think that you can just sort of wake up or participate a little bit and suddenly you're a great critical thinker. Critical thinking takes a long time to develop with constant practice. You have to constantly be working at it and checking your own biases. And this is why I love my job in like red teaming, where we get to apply these structured analytic techniques, as they're called, to force critical thinking on the team and in decision making. And so teams have to practice, analysts have to practice. But if you want an analyst like me on the team, because I have a very unique background and educational training, you have to come up with a way to standardize that to get people at the ready to do it.
Do you think that's because maybe an analyst position, even in the cyber world, is kind of thrown out there as an entry-level position? And then you maybe get a senior analyst and you get some other, but it's kind of like, oh, they'll man the SOC. Okay, good. Or oh yeah, there'll be SOC 1 analyst, SOC 2 analyst, and that's how I got my start in the, you know. And obviously there are super analysts, there are people with PhDs like yourself, but I don't know. Like I get the feeling that there might be a perception that it's an entry level role, and that actually what we should be doing, as you said, is creating a proper career path.
Mm-hmm. No, so I don't necessarily have a problem with the entry level roles if there's a significant onboarding process to do this. And so depending on your corporations or principals, resources to be able to do this, I would set aside the first 3 months just for training. That you can't sort of put them into it where, okay, no, we're going to collect the data and I'll translate it to a tactical intel report and send along. Because that's usually where protectors and security professionals get correctly irritated, that they're like, this isn't actionable. I can't make a decision based on what you sent me. I love your example of Egypt has pyramids. Okay, that doesn't help me move forward or anything. And so if you want to hire an analyst with a diverse background, because this is something we're talking about in red teaming, diverse backgrounds help a lot because it brings a fresh perspective, but you do need the same base level training. And so if we in the security profession could come up with like a 3-month process of say, okay, you need to read this book by Hoffman, you need to read this book by Zenko, you need to, practice writing this kind of report and come up with a steady thing where it's no, you have 3 months to learn all of this before you can really take on this role. I think that's most appropriate. And then as analysts move up, we have to be lifelong learners. This is something that's so important is intel isn't static, information isn't static. You have to constantly be learning new methods and tools in order to be moving forward. Like I, a couple years ago, started studying Python, started studying a couple languages to constantly be adding to my tool set so that as we take in new information, as we move up. And so moving from, entry-level analyst to the next level analyst to the next level analyst, more training should be going along the way. And we need to help standardize that training so that as they're going through it, it's not just because they become a subject matter expert in a very niche thing, but that they have the requisite skills. And these are more soft skills than direct hard skills, the soft skills of good analysis. Because that's where the problem is. Because you can even have a really amazing OSINTer, but that doesn't mean they can translate their OSINT to something actionable for the protector to make a decision on.
Yeah, because that's intelligence. Intelligence has to be actionable, and information has to be just information. Also, but is critical thinking a bit like, I don't know what it is, but I know it when I see it, or let me rephrase that. If I'm an EP operator and I want to see some good critical thinking that has been done for my operation, what is it going to look like?
Absolutely. So when I talk about critical thinking, people can get surprised by this, but Sherlock Holmes should be your model. Sherlock Holmes is the greatest critical thinker in literature. He's actually based off of a real life doctor that Doyle knew, who could make these kind of logical leaps that Holmes makes. But I highly recommend reading the original works of Doyle. A Study in Scarlet is the novel in particular. But Sherlock Holmes was able to take a couple pieces of information and then draw a conclusion, a probabilistic conclusion on that. And the reason it's so impressive is he takes multiple steps along the way. And so this is where it comes of like critical thinking training, critical thinking practice, is you need to work through every single one of those steps. And a lot of analysts have trouble with this because they've worked on things where they have assumptions that come into it, or security professionals with lots of training, as I mentioned before, where they can respond quickly and do something. But you need to be able to work through every single step of your thought process so that you can challenge bad assumptions, that you can work through the assumptions that you have, that you can make sure that you're logically moving from step to step within your thought process. And that's the practice that you have to be able to do. And so in like the intel space, be like, okay, Russia's invading Ukraine, and this is going to be a big deal. Okay, well, I think we can all work out it's going to be a big deal. I don't need an intel report to tell me that, but I need the intel report to tell me what parts of the global economy do Ukraine participate in, and fertilizer being a big one, and neon gas for lasers is another. Okay, how will those two impact my principal? Because fertilizer can impact food prices, not can, does impact food prices. So food prices will increase. Okay, food prices increases. Where will that be happening? Most likely in the Middle East. All right, is there other cultural or political issues that would be exacerbated by increased food prices and harming the economy? Then would this lead to particular protests in certain regions that is more reliant on the fertilizer, therefore the increase in food prices from the Russian invasion of Ukraine? Working through every single step to come to, okay, there are going to be protests in this area. My principal is traveling to this area. When protests are in this particular city, they're most likely at locations A, B, and C. Therefore, we're going to avoid those to achieve our objective. And that's how you have to draw it all the way through.
I feel like I need to say elementary, my dear Watson, because you've extrapolated it out. And no, I like that because maybe because some people may not wish to share the secret sauce, but sometimes on the podcast, maybe in other areas, I do wonder if people are holding back in giving that extrapolation, because sometimes they might say, well, this topic's important. I'm like, yeah, but how do we do it? And I like what you've done there to actually go, well, this country, this product, this issue, this cause, and so on. So I think that's very helpful. I think I know what you might say, but what are your thoughts on some of the sparkly box solutions out there that try and affix numbers to qualitative things? Like, there are sparkly box solutions that say Amsterdam is a level 5 green button, and that means whatever, and so they hire maybe some video games designers for the graphic user interface to create some sort of useful dashboard. Any use to that?
So this might be a controversial statement. I don't really think so. And it's we being people, but also security professionals, we want to make information as easy as possible to digest. And we like little boxes, we like little categories, but life doesn't really work that way. Life is overwhelmingly complicated. Every single issue you face is complicated. And so I just gave that example of like using the Ukraine war to talk about protests in the Middle East that could impact the principal. You have to do that with every single issue that comes across. You need to work through those mechanisms every single time, short and long-term cause and consequence, and moving through it every single point. But there's also something called the expert paradox that I point out with critical thinking. Experts are really, really good at predicting normal things. As long as things are going in the way they typically do, experts are very, very good at predicting it. They are not good at predicting the abnormal when something changes or new comes up. And this is my problem with those kinds of solutions, where it's like, oh, we're going to categorize the Netherlands as green, therefore you don't have to worry about anything. Okay, probabilistically you don't. But what about the quote unquote black swans? What about the things coming out of nowhere? Have you been paying attention? So this goes back to the probabilistic reasoning I was mentioning earlier. So there is probability X. All right, but what variables that show the changes up or down that could impact that to be more or less likely. And so you need to constantly be updating this. And also, those broader categories, even though we like to put things in nice categories, tend not to give you a very good picture. And I think America is a wonderful example of this. People will talk about, say, like median income. Well, that really is kind of a meaningless statement in the US when you have the cost of living in San Francisco and the cost of living of Wichita, Kansas. So a median income, which I think right now is like $48,000. Don't quote me on that. But that in San Francisco is absolute poverty. In Wichita, you're fine. And so being able to put the relevant context to these issues very much matters. And I'll give another example of why I don't really sort of like those categories. And again, I'll use the US because we just have such a big, diverse business set. Is a weak dollar good or bad for your business? Good or bad for your principal? Well, that entirely depends on the kind of industry they're in. And then even within the sector or industry, like what kind of imports or exports or services that they're doing. And so, we were talking about political risk. And political risk analysts, they could say, okay, the dollar is going to be weak. All right, well, that doesn't mean anything to me as an analyst or security professional or protector until you draw the multiple things down to your particular industry, your particular client. And so we use these boxes. They may make us feel better because I can easily categorize things in my brain. The world just doesn't work that way. And as like a final point to this, Alan Greenspan wrote a wonderful book called The Map and the Territory, where he is working through the financial crisis intellectually. And a big part of it was non-quantifiable variables, where how do you quantify? So we talked about like the inability to quantify, say, people like Churchill, but how do you quantify fear? How do you quantify hope? How do you quantify these emotions and feelings that you can't really put into numbers? And so you're trying to help like your analyst be able to forecast a particular issue or give actionability to it. You need to be able to describe these psychological forces or non-quantitative forces as well, that checking things into boxes isn't going to tell you.
Yeah, and so maybe I guess there's a better place for we don't know.
Yes, absolutely. This is something I think is so important because so many analysts try to do this thing. And I keep criticizing analysts, but it's true. Where you give them a topic and they're like, oh yeah, no problem. Or here's my opinion on this or blah, etc. You should be very comfortable, absolutely comfortable with saying, I don't know. Epistemic humility, that's our fancy term for being willing to say, I don't know. Epistemic humility is central to building trust between analysts and protectors, between people and their clients, but then also the recognition that I can't control everything in the world. So I'm going to give you this analysis. I'm going to make it as actionable as possible, but we can't know every single factor that's coming into this. This is where all your training as a protector for the last 10, 20 years is so important, is because here's the actionable stuff I can give you. You might have to deal with the unknown, and that's why you do all that other training to be able to respond to it well.
I like that, yes. But particularly these last few years, I feel, okay, there's a degree of, we want to make everyone calm and happy and do this and that, but maybe there were not enough people willing to say, I don't know. Because then everyone becomes an armchair historian, an armchair critic. There's that nice meme with the guy that says, last week I was a this expert, this week I'm a this expert. I really enjoy that meme. But all right, well let's now make it even more applicable for our protectors.
Mm-hmm.
They're doing protection. They have, many don't have academic backgrounds, right? This might sound a little bit too difficult because we've already on the podcast suggested that perhaps they do an introduction to coding to simply have a grasp of that world. And then we've had another podcast that said, well, cybersecurity has nothing to do with development and coding, so don't worry about that. Is this going to be as much of a leap for them if they want to add critical thinking to their skill set?
No, critical thinking is a very different skill because it is not a hard skill. And it is a quintessential skill in the sense that whether you're doing cybersecurity, whether you're doing executive protection, whether you're an Intel analyst, you need to be able to use critical thinking. And so I've given several examples of critical thinking within the Intel analyst sphere because that's what I do for a living. But for your protectors, it's going to be a different application of their critical thinking. And so what I would say to a protector is as they're training and going about whether it's medical emergency training or firearms training or evasive driving training, etc., they need to mentally work through all of the steps that they're doing. And I think this is where it's really important, is as they're making decisions, they need to start with the question, why? And so in red teaming, we call this the 5 whys. It's a very easy, applicable tool to help you use critical thinking in your everyday life. And so it's you go back with 5 why questions. So I did action X. Why did I do action X? Well, because of Y. Why did I do Y? And then you move to, I did it because of Z. Why did I do Z? And you go back with 5 whys, and then you understand your decision making. And this is a really easy way to practice critical thinking because it helps you work through the mental steps to get where you're going. And this is a skill also that isn't tangible. And so I know I use the like hard soft skills, but this is also one of those things that when you do it right, it comes through into everything that you're working on. It's not one of those things that I'm just going to apply in this situation. I'm just going to apply in this situation. And related to this is there's no like course or certification you can really do in critical thinking. I can't be like, go take this LinkedIn course or go take this Udemy course. Like you can't do that. I can send you books or discussions on epistemology, phenomenology, like do all like the study of it. But the real thing is you have to just do it in your everyday life. You have to just do it with your everyday decisions, with your everyday work stuff, and constantly be practicing applying it to everything. There's no certification for it.
Yeah, but some of those certification people will come out with the pink star of critical thinking 101. And then that puts it a lot. I mean, we had a thing about keeping fit, which for most protectors is absolutely not an issue. But the specific segment was keeping fit and ready after 50 or after 60. And what was brought up there was, well, hang on, there's no certificate for the achievement of being able to bench press what X, Y, and Z. I think this is in that same vein, something that you have to practice, something that you don't get a cookie for having achieved, and which might make it a little bit challenging. But people don't have to spend money on this necessarily, do they?
No, absolutely not. This is where it's a fantastic thing as a skill development, and makes you come off significantly more professional. By being able to use critical thinking in all of your stuff, you're going to just level up in other people's perception of your capabilities and your other skill sets as well. And so again, for this, you can easily look up, say, like red teaming tools or structured analytic techniques online if you want to like use structured ways of practicing this. But as I said, it's really just everyday practice in the decisions that you make in your personal life and in your professional life. And being able to explain all of these things and putting them together. And then the next step is, of course, the probabilistic reasoning and working on saying, okay, this variable impacts this variable. This is an intervening variable, and working and putting those together. But it's just basic constant practice in the way you live your life and the way you do your job. And you can develop this in a relatively short amount of time if you're willing to just do the mental effort every time you make a decision or come to a conclusion by working on that mental stuff. And you'll start seeing it happen regularly. If you're going to spend money on it, there is a book called Mastermind by Marakova, which is about the way Sherlock Holmes thinks. That's a book I would recommend. And then this may sound weird, but I very much recommend security professionals and protectors reading novels every once in a while. Novels are a wonderful way to help you work through critical thinking. It's not an academic exercise. Rather, it's the understanding the way characters have a mindset and take on decisions and work through their problems. And it helps you do XYZ in development of decision making and coming to conclusions. Novels are actually very, very wonderful for this. And then they're in a narrative form, which makes it more entertaining than trying to work through like the formal logic of philosophers.
Well, that's a great suggestion, and I dare say, the protectors are often standing up in a hallway for long periods of time, probably listening to our podcast right now, it detracts from the pain of standing for so long. But they might think, "Oh, I must listen to factual things all the time. I must always be learning." But I like that you've given them the permission, almost to read a novel.
Absolutely, this is. So it's not just protectors. I have become a big advocate of novels, and then intellectual use of television shows for similar reasons. But novels are a better way because you have to work through the entire process. It's not just handed to you like it is in TV shows. And there's not like a particular type of novel that you actually need to read because it's really just about character development and decision making. Like I always recommend Jane Austen. She's, I think, one of, if not the greatest novelist in history. But if you enjoy sci-fi and you want to read Gibson instead, or you love Lord of the Rings and you're a Tolkien fan, Doyle, as I said, is fantastic for his Holmes novels and the short stories that he does. But like my favorite novel is A Confederacy of Dunces by Kennedy Toole. That you have so many choices and different varieties because it's not actually the particular story that matters. It's taking on the mindset of a character. It's watching them make decisions. It's how they analyze. It's watching stories developed. And so you're seeing plot point A leading to plot point B and how did those things come about? You're being able to put together a narrative to understand how variables are interacting with each other. Literature is a wonderful thing to do this.
Fantastic. Well, I didn't think we'd end up there, but I'm pleased. I'm pleased we did. It is a great suggestion, and obviously, if you are standing up right now, listening to this podcast for a long time, we acknowledge your discomfort, and adding novels to your portfolio will be, or audio portfolio as well, will be great news. Treston, where can we find you next? What are you working on? How can people get in touch?
Absolutely. So I'm on LinkedIn. If people are interested. Next stuff I'm working on is actually a journal. Creating a journal with the IPSB to help actually, as I said earlier, with the professionalization of our industry. So we're starting a journal, an academic journal, to try and move the industry along forward. And I'll also be teaching at Georgetown in the fall. So that's kind of the stuff I'm doing now. But if people are interested in contacting me, LinkedIn is the best way. Nice,
and I like how you casually dropped that bombshell that the IPSB is doing their journal. I heard about it, but I like to see the progress. So it's really good news. Right. So, Treston, thank you very much for giving us a more tangible insight into critical thinking, making it much more accessible for our protector community. Very much appreciated your time and contribution to the Bodyguards for Kids forum that raised over $22,000.
Excellent.
So that is really good news. But yes, thank you very much. Critical Thinking for the Protector. This has been another fantastic edition of the Circuit Magazine podcast.
Well, thank you very much, Tristan, and I'm very much looking forward to welcoming you on the 11th of May to Alexandria at our next forum. But critical thinking as a topic, what a good jumping off point for tomorrow's Protector, Shaun. What did you take away from this theme?
No, I think exactly what we said in the introduction before actually listening to Tristan. I think, there is a world for all of us to be a little bit more of a critical thinker, in whatever area of life you're in. Don't just accept what you're being told, just look into it a little bit deeper. And there's always, a little bit more you can pull out of the situation, which opens your mind, gives you a little bit more intel, which can help you, help your teams, build a bigger picture of what's happening on the ground, and in other areas of that might be affecting your principal life. I think definitely great podcast there from Tristan, great interview, and definitely set you up for tomorrow's event.
And do you think that the protectors today are actually really well placed for this, because they are a little bit skeptical? Protectors have seen all sorts of weird and wonderful things, and so if someone walks up and says, I'm going to marry your principal tomorrow, it's like, tell me about that. Like, just a healthy degree of skepticism. Do you think that already exists?
I think it does. I don't know. I don't know if it comes with age, and you become a little bit wiser the more every day you live. But I definitely think, not skeptical, but definitely I find people looking a bit more, and they want to know why. What's in this for me, or tell me a bit more about that. And I think certainly in our industry, you do have to question things surrounding your principal. What someone's come to the principal's house, and why are you there? Can I help you? And just being a bit curious, is good. I think you can draw a lot of information, and I think people in our industry may be skeptical, but I think we all need a healthy degree of curiosity, which will help us in our day-to-day role.
You're right, and maybe I mislabeled it. Maybe it is curiosity and not skepticism. Maybe that's the key for critical thinking.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. Just by being a little bit curious, digging a little bit deeper below the surface level questions, and then you get the real answer, what you want.
And that's why it was so nice to have Treston on, because we do see examples of political scientists and historians and adjacent fields giving presentations about security. It's good. It's good stuff. But there's always the question, all right, let's apply it now. If I'm doing a PhD on 1950s something political strife somewhere, okay, but how's that going to help me in the field? Why does that matter? What are the implications today? Things like that. And maybe this is where we've found that bridge. Not that going to do a master's in war studies is bad. No, I know people love doing it, don't they, Shaun? There's so many people that go off and do that.
Yeah, I think sometimes when you look, people can write a paper on anything now, can't you? It's sometimes you write a paper when there's no need for a paper. I think just to get your name out there sometimes. But I totally agree.
It is tricky. Like, why is this paper in existence? And what's the problem we're trying to solve? What's in it for me? I don't know. I'm sort of paraphrasing some much more eloquent questioning that Treston has presented. So sorry about that, Treston. But I think that is the general flavor for today's session. As I said, coming up 11th of May in Alexandria, Virginia, Treston will be joining a panel, and we're going to talk protective intelligence, which is going to be great fun. That's next in-person event. Beyond that, we've had some great activity on the BBA Connect app and the NABA Protector app. Just recently, people have been inquiring about a particular geography and about colleagues operating in that geography, which do you know what? That's ideal, because we're connecting members, we're connecting subscribers with opportunities. So please keep those going, and whenever you see a request, even if you see it like within 1 minute, answer within a couple of days, still answer, still connect, because that's the beauty of the network, isn't it, Shaun? I mean, you must get asked quite a lot for referrals.
No, you're totally right, Phelim. We've got some great tools there on both of these apps, and not everyone uses them. If you are going to a different town, or your principal's traveling somewhere and you need a local asset in a particular area, please do ask, because generally, there'll be someone on that app who can, give you a little steer, recommend, chauffeur companies, hotels, whatever it may be. And also, it's nice to, grow your network, get them in your black book, and maybe someday you can return the favor when they're coming to your neck of the woods.
Perfect. And yeah, takes a network to defeat a network, and then this is it in practice. We are still looking for fantastic contributions to the magazine, so please get those in as soon as possible so it can make the next edition. And the magazine, doing very, very well. It's wonderful to see it develop. Always love the artwork. Personally, I always love the artwork, but I know that's because of our editor, Jon.
Yeah, shout out to Jon. He puts a lot of effort into the magazine, both creating the art, pulling the articles in, and building the whole product. And we certainly couldn't do it without him, for sure. So shout out to Jon for that. Absolutely,
yeah, and it's wonderful. I know Elijah's been working on a new article, a new editor's letter as well. It really is a great team effort, and I highlight that because this Circuit Magazine podcast very much feeds into the magazine, or it brings the pages of the magazine to life. So if you've liked this particular podcast episode, obviously go to the magazine to learn more, to get more in depth. And there's a huge quantity of back issues as well. And again, we do these things thematically, so you will find other related articles, won't you, Shaun?
Yeah, and you can use these back issues of the Circuit Magazine to help you build your next white paper.
There you go. Everyone's asking for one. That's a brilliant reference tool. Well, Shaun, thank you for thinking critically with me, and it's been great to have Treston on board. Obviously, great that we got to know him at the Bodyguards for Kids initiative, raised so much money, but we're looking forward to seeing him in person 11th of May. And critical thinking is absolutely for the Protector. So get into it, make it relevant, ask better questions. And from Shaun and myself, this has been another perfect edition of the Circuit Magazine podcast.
You have been listening to the Circuit Magazine podcast. Be sure to subscribe and be sure to not miss an episode.